All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're about a minute after the hour, and we do have three attendees. I'm Gracie from Iowa College Aid, and I'm going to be your guys' moderator today. And we have a very exciting session with Mark Salisbury from TuitionFit. And he's going to teach you about a wonderful resource that you guys can use. A little bit of housekeeping. Since this is webinar style, you guys can't unmute yourself to ask questions. So if you need to ask a question, you can type it in the chat. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a little like chat bubble. So you would just click that and type it in there, and I'll be watching it and make sure that Mark can answer any of your guys' questions. All right, Mark, it's all you.
Oh, cool. I'm excited. This is really fun to be able to share this with everyone. Some of you may have seen this stuff before, and I know some of you are using TuitionFit now, and it's just really gratifying and flattering, really, that folks would give this thing a shot. But we've really been able to solve some big problems for a lot of students and for a lot of school counselors with TuitionFit. So, Gracie, please, if somebody has a comment or question that they want to jump in right away, I am all about just answering questions on the fly and making this a conversation as necessary. So,
perfect. I will do that.
Great. Okay, so I think there's some value in sort of zooming out for a second and just saying, you know, like, what are we trying to get done here? What are we going for here? Because as a school counselor, providing college search guidance is not just a simple thing like, oh, hey, you forgot your pen, here's a pen. There's a lot more to that. And school counselors, you guys know this more than anything, time is like the thing you don't have, and you get swamped with all kinds of stuff. So I think there's some real value in zooming out a little bit to sort of frame this whole conversation. So what is success supposed to look like? You know, for students, success really isn't just going to college, and success isn't just finishing college. That's a picture of me finishing college right there. Success is a lot more than that. For students, success looks like on the day after they graduate from college, they have no constraints. And what I mean by that is, yes, they've learned a lot and they've grown up a lot, but there's nothing holding them back from taking an opportunity that comes along in any location that pays any salary. Maybe it's a nonprofit, maybe it's even a volunteering thing that's really close to their heart. Maybe it's a job halfway across the country that doesn't pay very much, but you want to go for it because it's your passion. And today, the biggest constraint for students and college graduates is actually the debt that they've accrued while they've been in college. That means for them, you know what, there's this awesome startup that I want to go work with, and it just could change the world, and I'm super passionate about it, but guess what? They don't pay very well, and I've got a debt payment of $400 a month starting up in a couple of months, so I can't take that job because I couldn't possibly afford to make those payments and take that job. That's what the constraints look like for students today. And so I think there's some value in sort of zooming out and thinking about this from the perspective of the students and saying, okay, what does success look like for our students? And then how can we contribute in the most sort of precise way to help them maximize value and minimize price so that we, those of us working with students as school counselors, can get them on the right track the best as possible to give them the best chance of getting to this kind of success. So I wanted to say that first to sort of frame this stuff, because what I just said so far is like all this grandiose thing, and you're like, but as a school counselor, how can I do that? Seriously, like, how are you going to pull this off? Because what I just said sounds like it takes a ton of time. And certainly, yeah, there's a lot of thinking that goes in there, and you as a school counselor can't do all that for every student or for every family. So I'd like to sort of frame this whole project in thinking about, as a school counselor, how do you get your students on the best track to do that? to clarify the goal for students, to simplify their process, and then empower the student and the parents so that they can complete the process of accessing college and being on a track in which they can finish and have no constraints when they're done. So all of that to frame this, how do we usually start this college search process? Well, usually we got a bunch of colleges out there. We start looking at colleges and we start by comparing colleges. And it's this one against that one, against this other one, against this other one over there. Oh, hey, what about the one down the road? I don't know. And the problem, of course, for the students is what they don't know in the early stages is that later on you find out that one school is going to be $20,000 a year for a student and another one's going to be $50,000 a year for a student. And you wish you would have known that way back when you started, because the school that was 50 grand is a total non-starter. Why did we even do that? So I'm going to argue that we shouldn't start by comparing colleges, because what we do when we do that, we don't know the actual prices. And so when we start by comparing colleges, we get sucked to an environment where we really can't compare value and we can't compare return on investment, because in order to compare value is a very specific and individual construct, and value doesn't really come out of the abstract until you know what your actual price is going to be, right? For you, value might mean that the price has got to be way down here and it's got to have all this other stuff. But until you know what that price tag is, it's all sort of like, oh yeah, this is value. And the school will tell you they've got lots of programs and they've got lots of study abroad and they've got a really awesome ice cream machine that you can have as much as you want. That's not value, that's just features. And because price matters so much for students, and today it is the #1 thing that families care about, without actual price, we end up increasing the chance of an affordability crisis for students next year, the year after that. And the worst thing we can do for our students is put them in a position where they go to college and then they drop out because of cost. So they've got lots of debt, but no degree to show for it. And that is the problem with the student debt crisis right now. Instead, what we would like to be able to do is start with price range and figure out what are the schools that are going to be in my price range. And then I'll go look at them. So your family and the student has to have a conversation about what's our price range, and it has to be an honest, reasonable conversation. But as soon as you can do that, you could eliminate a whole bunch of schools right out of the gate. And what you do is you make this process so much simpler for a family, because now it's not like go look at every school out there and maybe one of them will work and then maybe one of them will be the right price that you need, but you won't know that until afterwards. Instead, if you start with price range, then you know that every school that student goes to look at, every school that you tell that student, hey, this is a school that might be a possibility for you, it's an actual possibility. It's actually plausible that if the student goes through the whole process and applies to that school and gets accepted, that's still a school that they could actually enroll at and they could afford it. And that would be a phenomenal thing to be able to give to every one of your students. Here's the schools that are in your price range. Start digging. But it's not an endless list. It's a list that you can manage. So I'm arguing that the way we've been doing the college search is actually not helpful. Start with college and then figure out how to pay it later. Let's start with price range. And that's the way to ensure, as a counselor, ensure that your students have a shot at no constraints after they graduate. Okay, so with that said, if you have access to the actual prices as a counselor, you can help your families simplify this process. You can help them build a better college list, because every school that they actually look at is a school they can ultimately afford. They can make value-based decisions, because you can say, look, this school's $5,000 cheaper than that school, but wait a minute, one school's got a much better graduation rate than the other, so maybe we ought to be looking at the school that's a little bit more expensive, right? you can make those value decisions now because you know what the price range is. And a lot of times when families are looking at schools, you sort of know one's more expensive than the other, but you don't know how much. When you quantify that, all of a sudden you get to a place where you say, you know what, I'm okay with that school being 5,000 more than the other, but 20,000 more, forget it. Like there's no way it's worth, like if it was 20,000, then like the nicest sheets in the dorm ever. And we know that dorm rooms aren't known for like fancy 1,000-point sheets, right? So, right. So the point is here is that ultimately you're going to help your students get the financial fit they need to get, have a better final price, and be on track to no constraints after they graduate from college. Whether it's a 2-year school or a 4-year school, no constraints after you graduate. So how does TuitionFit work with all of that? Well, the idea behind TuitionFit's actually pretty simple. And if you've shopped for a car and used Kelley Blue Book or TrueCar or Edmunds or any of those other ones in the last decade, you already know how this works. The prices, the actual prices that students pay are not hidden in a vault somewhere. They're in the financial aid awards that colleges and universities send out. They send out millions of them every year. And so seniors and their families, high school seniors get these things. They're sitting on the kitchen table or they're in a student's portal. All we did with TuitionFit was say, why don't we just share all that stuff to a single location in the cloud? And we will anonymize all the letters, so we protect all of your individual personal information. We also know how to read these things because we've got 40 years of experience writing financial aid award letters and reading them. I sort of hate to admit this, but yeah, I spent 25 years in higher ed making the sausage. So I know how this goofy thing works. So we know how to decode all this stuff and organize it by the type of student. Because this is another secret that I don't think you find out very often with the college search process, is colleges will have all kinds of conversations about the criteria that they use to admit you. But they don't use that criteria to decide your price. Price is a totally different beast. Price is a pretty simple two-way matrix. What's your academic merit look like and what's your financial need look like? And they got a big graph on the wall in the back room that says these are the prices that these different students are going to pay in each of these cells. So we just reverse engineer it. All of this information gets shared to the cloud. In TuitionFit, we organize it. And then you can log into TuitionFit and you can see all of the prices that other students like you or like yours are being offered. We're not predicting what your price will be. We're telling you this is what other students are getting. Use that information just like a Kelley Blue Book for college prices. So with that information, you now know what schools would be in your price range or not by some estimate, but by actual award letters. So that's how TuitionFit works. And the site is tuitionfit.org. And we have a bunch of videos in here that I'll point to a couple of times in this webinar at the Learn More link that you can watch. It's me, probably the same hat, doing a little demonstration, just how you sign up and how the different things work. So with this information, TuitionFit becomes really valuable in really 4 different ways. And you as a counselor can cut to the chase with students and families and give them really valuable information really instantaneously so that you simplify their process and give them something that's manageable so that they can then move to the next stage of the college search process and know that everything they're doing is, there's not going to be any surprises down the road. They're not going to spend a day driving to see a college, come back, spend the money on an application, and then 4 months later find out all of that was a waste of time because that school is going to ask me to pay more than I can possibly afford. So this is how TuitionFit works. And I'll just show you a couple of different stages of how it works, and then can answer lots of questions, and I'll give you my contact information at the end. So let's start about thinking about it if you're building a better college list for your students. with TuitionFit, your students can find the schools in their price range right away, and they can start to know the financial implications of different choices. The other thing that is incredibly valuable here, and I'm not sure which one of these is actually more valuable, to be honest with you. You may have noticed this from time to time with students. The students get hung up on their dream school idea, and they fall in love with a place, and it's gonna be super expensive, and it's in California or someplace far, like all this different stuff. Meanwhile, mom and dad know that they're not gonna be able to afford that, but they also want to do right by their child, and they don't really want to break their heart and all this other stuff. So they don't really talk about money. And over the course of the search process, this contention builds up between mom and dad and the kids, because the kids want the expensive thing, and the mom and dad are like trying to subtly or not so subtly suggest something else. All of that happens because you don't have any pricing data in front of you, so you can never really have a conversation about value. So what TuitionFit does right away is students can set up an account, and I'll show you a little bit how counselors can set up an account and then link with students so that you can sort of look over their virtual shoulder, which turns out to be kind of valuable today. Student starts out with, I only want to look at the schools I can afford, right? Which is the sort of reasonable question. So the student sets up an account, and the counselor, you can walk them through it. You just have to have some basic information, just some basic demographic stuff, have their high school GPA, a test score if they've got one, which today is a sort of maybe, and then an EFC. Now, most of you know that this thing called the FAFSA that we all love and hold dear to our hearts, yeah, maybe sort of, not really. The expected family contribution, the number that comes from the FAFSA, is the number that colleges use as a proxy for financial need. Now, if you have your students do the FAFSA in October, which I hope you're really pushing them to do that, that's great. But you can also get an EFC estimate from one of probably 50 different FAFSA estimators that are out there online. There's some really easy ones at finaid.org. There's a more complex one that's at the College Board. You could just Google EFC calculator and find 20 of them on the first page. But you can use them all. They're all pretty good because it's a pretty basic formula. As long as you have an estimated EFC, that's all you need. And then what you do is you create a free account. The student creates a free account, and instantly you can filter by price, and then you get a list of schools. And the list of schools comes from all of the financial aid offers that were shared with us in the last year by a student just like yours, meaning a student with the same high school GPA and a student with the same EFC. So now you're looking at a list of schools that we have real offers from, that were sent to and shared by students just like yours. And then when you filter it by price, what you've got right here is you can see, okay, this is a list of schools that offered a student like me a price of $15,000 or less. So I know if I look at any of these schools, it's gonna be in my price range if that's what my price range is. Now there's one other feature here that's worth knowing. Students can use this or they can choose not to, that you can upgrade, and it's a $50 cost. It's essentially in place of having an award letter to share, and I'll talk about that in a second, where the family could see all of the actual pricing data that comes with each of these lists of schools, and they could click on that little icon on the right and see the actual award letter that it came from. So students can do that or they don't have to, but just to get them started, this is a really useful tool to get going. And this piece of the puzzle, all this extra data, is really useful in helping families have a real conversation about value. Because let me just point you to two offers at the very bottom of this list. Let's say you've got a student and your young person is just really wants to be a place where they've got big time football, and they're looking at a couple of schools and they say, Auburn, oh yeah, I heard of Auburn, they're really good. And then Arizona State, I don't know what they're, but I know they got football. Okay, great. Before, you would just say, okay, there's two schools, great. And the student says, I really want to go to Auburn. And mom and dad are like, I don't know. Now the question can be, yeah, maybe Auburn's better. But is Auburn $17,000 a year better? Because the price that the same type of student got at Arizona State was $22,900 per year, and that's for tuition, fees, room, and board. And that same kind of student got an offer from Auburn for $39,200. So now you can have a real conversation about, is Auburn $17,000 better? It might be, because Auburn might have a specific program that you really want to go into that has to do with studying some particular science that Arizona State doesn't have. Okay, but now you can quantify that conversation. And that's why this is so valuable for families. And we've seen this over and over in the last year, that it really allows mom and dad and student to have a conversation about cost and value that doesn't pit them against each other, actually puts them on the same side of the conversation. So that's what TuitionFit can do for a family. And for a counselor working with a family, you can just get them on this tool right away, and they can find a list of schools that fit their price range. So now let's start talking about what happens as students start to get award letters. A couple of things that we suggest. First of all, the basic tenet of TuitionFit is for seniors who are starting to get financial aid awards and offers and acceptance letters, is as soon as you share one financial aid offer to TuitionFit, you get free access to the whole data set of comparable information. Not just in previous years, but in the current year in real time. So what we tell students to do is find a college that might be a sort of maybe on your list, that is going to be affordable, that has rolling admissions, maybe even they waive their application fee for students. Get that application in October. Treat it as a practice application if you really want to, but get it in, because that's going to get turned around and you're going to have a decision from a school in late October, early November. As soon as you get that, you upload it to TuitionFit. And now for the rest of your senior year, you can just watch the prices coming in. And it's almost like watching corn futures or soybean futures. You see the prices changing over time, and you can use that information as a student and a family to inform the next choices that you make about the schools that you are going to apply to that still have a deadline January 1st. But now you see, you're like, no, forget it. That's crazy. Or, hey, here's a school that I had no idea. Now you know that the schools you're talking about and thinking about are in your price range, and you can start to make much more informed decisions. Okay. Again, there's videos on the Learn More site for TuitionFit that you can look at to see all of how this works. But the idea here is blow away all the fog of the way this process has traditionally worked and give every student and family information and leverage for free, because it turns out that about 85% of colleges and universities, they're now negotiating with any student that wants to negotiate. You can call it appeal. Appeal makes it sound like you're the rich king and the schools and the students down like the surf. Please, can I have? But the reality is every school is negotiating. There's maybe 25, 30 schools that just won't because they don't have to, but everybody else, they need students. And there's not enough students to go around. So you're in a position of power if you have this information. So for a senior, this is how TuitionFit works. This is a screenshot of an actual student from last year. She applied to these 4 schools, and you're in Iowa, so all these ought to look fairly familiar. She applied to these 4 schools. She got into these 4 schools. She knew the sticker prices were pretty high. This is all tuition, fees, room, and board. And we process the award letter. We anonymize all the information, all the personal information, and we figure out what's going to be on your bill in August if you chose to go to this school. And that's what's under price to pay now. Historically, the student would have 4 options. There are 4 choices. That's it. But because she shared it with TuitionFit, and because of the nature of how things are now, Most colleges and universities are looking for students all the way to August. Most colleges and universities are more than willing to negotiate on price because they need students. So when she shared it to TuitionFit, all of a sudden she got to see all these other offers from students like her who are uploading the offers that they've received. And collectively, you start to have options and you put these prices in context. And for this particular student, there wasn't any good reason why she didn't apply to Northern Illinois. She just didn't because I don't want to fill out another application, whatever it is. But then she saw that it would be $2,500 a year less. A couple of phone calls later, and this student saved $10,000 on college over 4 years just because she saw this information. She wouldn't have known otherwise. It's the same thing if you used any of kinds of tools that are available when you shop for a car. You saw that the dealer in the next county over was selling that car for less. Aha, made a few phone calls, and you ended up saving money on that car. Same principle goes here. So this is how TuitionFit works. And this is how it's worked for thousands of students now, all around the country. So I mentioned this earlier, for school counselors. Obviously, if a student comes in and has their laptop with you and logs into their account, you can look at it, that's great. But you may be entirely online right now. Or you might be helping a student and they want your feedback middle of the evening somewhere, right? Because I know you don't want to tell anybody, but we actually do tend to work longer than just the hours of the school day. I know that's shocking, but yeah, we'll get at that in another webinar. What you can do with TuitionFit is you can link, the advisor can set up their own account for free. And then the advisor invites the student to share access. So any student that you have that's looking at college and thinking about this stuff, which I hopefully is most, if not all of them, they can then respond to that invitation and share access with you. And then you can see what they see and look over their virtual shoulder anytime you want. And this allows you to see not just what one student's comparable institutions are, but all of them, and provide all kinds of guidance where you're looking at schools and you're starting with financial fit. And so every instance you're talking about, what's a school that's going to be the right financial fit, that's going to be the best value, the best return on investment, so the student really is in a position to have no constraints when they graduate. Now, there's one other tool that I want to share with you, and we can talk about it for a little bit. You might have some questions. And it's a search tool that school counselors, it's for search professionals only. School counselors can use this tool. It is a subscription-based tool, and I can talk more about pricing in the question and answer later, because you can subscribe as an individual or you can subscribe as a whole school. But with this whole data set, sometimes it'd be really nice just to be able to search the data set. Just, you know what, I'm really curious. What are the prices for these kinds of students offered by what kinds of schools? So when you've created an account, there's an advanced search link up on the dashboard. You sign up for it, you have to subscribe, and then it's a kind of a one-trick pony, but it's the keys to the kingdom. You plug in an EFC, you plug in a high school GPA. If you have a test score, you can plug that in, but you don't have to have it. And then on the second row, you plug in the type of university, whether you want to look at public universities or private colleges, or you can pick both. And then the size of the school, and this is based on the undergraduate enrollment. And then the state, if you want to pick a particular state or not, or several states. And then you hit search, and immediately you will see all of the information we have from all of the awards that have been shared with us, actual prices that these schools are asking students, just like the one you've plugged in, to pay. So from the right out of the gate, you know what prices are out there for what kind of students, and you have that price to pay now slider so you can cut that list down. We've seen people with 1,100 options that come out of the search deal, so they want to sort of narrow it down, which is entirely reasonable. But this then allows you to just search the data set. And sometimes that's incredibly useful for meeting with students, just be able to pull that right up. So TuitionFit as a tool for counselors, helping students clarify their goal, that their goal isn't just to get into a college, and it's certainly not to turn themselves into a trophy that they think, well, the bigger the brand name school I got into, the better person I am. You know, at the end of the day, it's you in the mirror in your pajamas. Like, that's it. Like, you like who you see or not. Doesn't matter what school you got into. It's graduate with no constraints. It's graduate from college with no constraints. And the most important criteria to make sure that happens is to ensure that the college the student goes to is a financial fit so that they can graduate. Because if it's not a financial fit, the likelihood is that they won't even finish. The second thing now that TuitionFit does is to simplify the process by instantly finding the financial fit colleges for each individual student. And that has not been possible before. Any of you who have access to the tools that are available, maybe you even have something like Naviance at your school, maybe you have one of the other tools that are out there, they're all built on pick colleges to compare. You might pick a bunch of criteria, and you might even look at the sticker prices, which, by the way, only 10% of college students across the country pay the sticker price. And I can tell you where all those 10% are. They're at the Ivy League schools and they're really wealthy families. So you could also look at the average price, but the average price, the net price, is not necessarily what your student would pay. And the problem today is that the net price, you can be $10,000 on either side of it. That's a ton of money over 4 years. So that net price is not very helpful. You need to know the actual price that that student would be asked to pay. And that's where TuitionFit really matters. And then finally, when you've provided students with a clear path, you've provided the student and their parents something that's very simple for them to follow, that they can go look at schools. Every school that they look at is gonna be a viable option. And there's no question about whether, I mean, the question about whether the student will get into that school is not really a question either, because the data that came to TuitionFit is from students who also got into that school. So now it's a question of less about will I get in and whether I can afford it, even while you're doing all the other stuff. And the question is more about, is this a school I can succeed at? And now your conversation is much more about the students, and the family's conversation is much more, how do I succeed at this place? Again, all of it comes back to the goal is graduate with no constraints. And that's where TuitionFit's built. So that is how this whole tool is set up. That's really the crux of it. I just want to admire my fancy slide that took me forever to build. But my bigger question really right now is, what questions do you have, and how can I answer those questions best?
And as a reminder, if you have questions, you can hit the chat bubble at the bottom and type them in, and then I will read them to Mark to make sure he can get them answered. So Mark, while we wait to see if anyone has questions.
You know this process pretty well. I'll bet you have a question or two.
I do have a question or two. What would you say students should consider when narrowing down the schools from the TuitionFit list? So they've used TuitionFit, they have their price comfortable schools. What should be the next thing they look at?
The next thing that they should look at really is part of the forgetting the old information that they thought they knew that was actually not true. 20 years ago, it was always true that the public institution was cheaper than the private institution. It just always was. And what students and families will see on this, just in black and white, is that there's all kinds of private institutions that are actually less expensive than public institutions. And that's a really important thing to note, because Once you've identified some institutions, you're going to see a much wider range of institutions than you maybe thought you would see. The next thing I would argue to start looking at is look at that institution's 4-year graduation rate. That information is available on a lot of different sites. College Navigator is one of the easy ones to find it, but there are other sites that one can use. And school counselors, if you have tools that you use with students to help them through the college search, a lot of those tools will have that data in it because they pull it from the federal government, the data that higher education institutions have to record and report to the federal government. But if you see a school that is two schools that are the same price, you might see two schools that are offering the same price, and one of them, their 4-year graduation rate's 25%. 25% of the kids graduate in 4 years. Well, that means unless you're a special snowflake, you probably are going to be there for another year of tuition. So by comparison, if there's another school that's even several $1,000s more, but their 4-year graduation rate is 60%, well, that's actually worth paying attention to. And it's those kinds of questions that really now take on a whole nother meaning when you put them in the context of price, right? Because let's say you're looking at two schools and one school's $10,000 a year and another one's $17,000 a year. Well, if you went to the school that was 10,000 but had to go for 5 years, that's still going to be more than the school for 4 years at 17, right? So there's a bit there that matters. Actually, my math is a little bit off here, but if you were at the school for 6 years at 10,000, that's going to be more than if you're at 4 years at 17. And it's really worth putting those things in context, because then you can start to really assess which one's the better investment, right? The other thing people forget is if you're going to go to college for a couple extra years, that's income that you won't have, right, out in the professional world somewhere, right? So it's kind of important to put both of those pieces of information in there. So graduation rate is one. Size of the average class at a particular institution is a second one. Lots of folks seem to prefer a class where there's 20 students as opposed to a class with 200. I know that might sound shocking, but it's true. Like, it's true. And you can find that data about that institution and you can look at it. And I would, by the way, just recommend, don't use the student-teacher ratio as the number that you think means the average size of the class, because that's not the same thing. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that is. I'm the guy who reported this data to from colleges of the federal government for 8 years, so I kind of know that little backstory too. But my point is, you can start to now put a lot of these different criteria in place in your calculation and put it up against the price tag to start coming up with what's a school that really is going to be the best value for me.
Awesome. I think that's such good advice, and definitely stuff that when I went through college, I didn't think twice about.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the appeal process and appealing your award letter.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice to parents or students who might want to attempt that?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you for asking. The advice is actually sort of not really advice. It's just do it. Do something. Make a phone call. Like, I mean, I am telling you, most colleges and universities nowadays, when they send out their first award letter, that's not their best price for you. That's not the price they could actually do. That's the price that they would like to do, because they have a budget and they have to make their budget and they're a business, and okay, fine. No, nothing against the schools. But if you don't call, you don't email, you don't do anything, then that's the price they're going to ask you to pay. But I guarantee you, if you just reach out and you just, obviously nicely, don't be a jerk, but nicely reach out and say, you know what, we really like your school. We really like some of the people we met there. It looks like it would be a wonderful fit for student, our son or daughter, but it's not easy for us to come up with the money to pay for college. And we're looking at a couple of other institutions, and we're kind of having a hard time making the math work here. Is there anything that you could do to help? Just ask that. You don't have to get into a big argument, and you don't have to, just ask that. And in many cases, that school will find some money for you. And it's weird, like for them, it's like, well, we'll throw you $1,000. Like they're tossing you a dime. Because their budgets are, you know, millions upon millions, right? But for a thousand, like that's, I can get a lot of hamburgers for $1,000. Like that's a lot of money for me. I'm trying to pay for college, right? So ask. And if the school says no, that's the worst it will be. I guarantee you the college isn't going to be angry with you for asking, because they've got 10,000 applications and they've accepted 7,000 of them. And they're only hoping that 1,000 show up. Like it's their numbers, their scale is just a very different scale. So if you ask, and especially if you ask in the context of paying for college is not easy. Like we're trying to make this work. They understand that. So just ask.
I think that's such good advice. I don't see any other questions. Do you have any final statements that you want to share with everyone?
Sure. For school counselors, the whole purpose of TuitionFit was to actually help people give guidance that cuts to the chase and that's simple and that's instant, so that you can spend your time as a school counselor on all the other stuff that you get handed. So if you have other questions about how TuitionFit works, I'm right here in Davenport, Iowa, as you can see behind me. I'm not actually outside, and it's not actually nighttime in Davenport, but this is Davenport, Iowa. We are an Iowa company, and like the whole point of doing this is really help students in Iowa. Yes, it's turned out to be helping students across the country, but if you have questions, you can email me or you can call me. I mean, really, you can call me anytime, and I'm glad to help. And if you're interested in the search tool, it's $35 a month. So it's not really very expensive for a school counselor individually. That ends up being about 420 some bucks a year. But if a school wants to subscribe, we can do a sort of school price that really is like if you have 4 or 5 counselors, we'll essentially give you the price of not quite what 2 counselors cost, but then you can have it for everybody in the school. So the idea here is to give you a tool that you can use and that you actually make it work, because when your students share data, all your other students benefit because they get to see it and use it to compare.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. This was such good information. I'm sure our parents and counselors and students learned a ton. Thank you, everyone who is on the call. We have a few more sessions this week, so keep an eye out. I think there's still time to register, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks.